Hi everyone, I wanted to talk about Geoffrey Chaucer and the Canterbury Tales. So Chaucer lived and wrote at the end of the Middle Ages, and he lived through a tremendous amount of social, political, and economic change. He also worked at many different jobs that exposed him to many different walks of life, different classes of people, and all of these things highly influenced the material that he later wrote about. Before we go on, fun fact about Geoffrey Chaucer is when he was captured during the war, Edward III valued him so much that he not only paid a ransom to get him back, but he granted him a gallon of wine a day for the rest of his life. So this is probably in recognition of his skills as a poet. Chaucer was valued at the time during his life because of his talent. So let's go backwards just a little bit. We're talking about the history coming before Chaucer, and we'll talk about some events during his lifetime that impacted him. So we know that in 1066, William the Conqueror invaded Britannia and came to rule over the Anglo-Saxons. The Normans didn't leave, they were there for 300 years, and their culture and language became dominant. And their merger with the Anglo-Saxons who spoke Old English, this merger became the English people we think of today. So the aristocrats, their language became the official language of the state, and their culture and their ways became dominant at the time. We still have this idea or this political system of feudalism where the nobility have all the power and wealth, and the peasants are serving underneath them. So there were three classes and three estates in medieval society known as the aristocracy, I can't talk today, the clergy, and the peasantry. And something interesting to note about these classes, no matter if it was the aristocracy or the peasantry, there were certain roles assigned for women, but these differed in kind of folklore or the ideals that society held at the time. So there was this ideal that we still see stories about today of medieval romance and chivalry, right? So under the feudal system, the chivalric code was honored. Women were elevated to this ideal, and there was this idea that the knight would perform acts of bravery and act honorably in the name of a lady. And we see that prevalent through many stories of the time period. In addition, this type of courtly love was elevated to the position of Jesus' mother, so that this idea of love between a knight and a woman was highly esteemed and also had to be non-sexual. So this kind of ideal is not what reality represented at the time, however, because the reality of life for peasant women was childbearing, working in the house, doing heavy manual labor in the field, and for an aristocratic woman, childbearing and household supervision were largely what she was limited to. So just an interesting note about the roles of women in the time period and how it differed from what people wrote about. So let's talk for a moment about some of the events that Chaucer lived through. We have the Crusades. This began shortly after the Norman conquest and went on all through Chaucer's life until after his death. In addition, the Crusades, as people were traveling to different areas, they came in contact with the Arabic culture, and from this emerged a new class of people called the merchant class. So they were people who shared a common occupation, they gathered together for common goals, and they formed guilds. So you're going to see this merchant class present in the Canterbury Tales, something that emerged during Chaucer's lifetime from the events of the Crusades. In addition, there is the birth of universities during this time period. So In the past, Christian monasteries were the traditional institutions of European learning, and literacy was largely restricted to the clergy. However, Oxford and Cambridge became the city's centers for learning, and this shifted the opportunities for people to get education and to learn to read. Another thing that Chaucer lived through was the Black Plague. This killed up to 50% of Britain's population, and it also weakened the feudal system because so many of the peasants died that there weren't as many people to work for the nobility anymore. And on top of that, the 100 Years' War, which was an unsuccessful war against France. This also occurred during Chaucer's lifetime. So what's happening here during all these events is this incredible moment of linguistic change. English had started as Old English, which is represented now by the peasantry, who are the Old English people who were originally there in Britain. But as the Normans came in and made French the dominant language, many of the peasants' husbands went to war for the French and died, and so these Anglo-Saxon war widows married the Norman soldiers. So suddenly you've got a household that's speaking French and Old English. The children of these marriages spoke both languages, and there were not schools to regulate language. There weren't books that were regulating it, so there was nothing to keep it from changing to meet the needs of those who spoke it. So eventually these two languages merged to form Middle English, and it's more than these two languages really, because there's Latin words that are coming in that was in common usage from the clergy. So many languages are coming in to form Middle English. So Chaucer wrote in Middle English during this time period. And of course, Middle English is the precursor to what we speak today, which is modern English. And again, this is this combination of all these Norman and Anglo-Saxon interactions during the time period. So if you look at the English language, English has more ways to say the same thing than any other language on earth. And this is what really gave Chaucer literary power, because the language had exploded in size during the previous 3 centuries, and he had more words to choose from than anyone who came before him. So when he writes the Canterbury Tales, he has a treasure trove of words to choose from, and he's making a sketch of British society as well as looking at what was to come. So the story is about a group of people going on a religious pilgrimage, and they're starting out at the Tabard Inn, and their destination is the shrine of St. Thomas A. Becket at Canterbury Cathedral. And Thomas A. Becket was a Norman. He had risen to great power, and King Henry II ordered his death, and he became a martyr. So he was an important figure at the time, and so the group in the story is going to visit his shrine. So there are 30 pilgrims on the trip, including the narrator, who is Geoffrey Chaucer. And you'll notice in the story that each pilgrim is representative of a type, a particular group of people. They are called by the occupation or station in society that they represent. So as you're reading the story, pay attention to their physical features, their behavior, and you can kind of get clues about the stations in society that they're meant to portray. In the story, also, the narratives are they're in a format called a frame tale. So it's a narrative that brings the audience into a second narrative. And then the general prologue is also a frame tale that sets up the premise of the story. So originally, Chaucer intended to write 2 stories for each of the 30 pilgrims for each way on the journey to the shrine and back. So he planned to write 120 stories plus the prologue, and even though he worked on it for 13 years, he only came up with 23 tales plus the prologue. However, these are a wonderful contribution to English literature, and I hope you enjoy some of these tales as you go through. They're definitely full of humor and wit.